So today we will be talking about the science of self-compassion and cultivating compassion. Very thrilled to have Mia Baumgartner with us here today. Mia is the manager of spiritual care and well-being at University of Washington Medical Center. She has her master's in nonprofit leadership from Seattle University, is certified in cultivating compassion training, CCT, leads many workshops on burnout mitigation, resilience, self-compassion, and has over 18 years experience facilitating and researching self-compassion. Maya is such a great resource to have at the university, and we're so thrilled that she's here to speak today. And then once again, on, I believe it is February 22nd at noon, it's part 2. So you can come back and join us then as well. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off here. Just a few things. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll pause throughout and then again at the end for questions. You can always raise your hand as well. This is a shared space. So we look forward to engaging with you. Thanks so much, Maya.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anna. This is really one of my joys is to over the past several years is in talking about resilience is to have come across just the powers of self-compassion, and I can't wait to share that with you today. We will, during this session, it's a 2-part series, so we'll talk about science of self-compassion and do a little few practices today. And then next time I invite you, it will be, why is compassion so hard? What are the difficulties of compassion? And that will have a focus even on compassion for others and those biases that we build. So this is more of our compassion on ourselves, and we'll talk more about compassion for others in our next session. So feel free while we go along, feel free to chat if you want. Anna will get those chats to me as needed, but it's really great for you guys to be here. And if you want just to get to know who's here, go ahead and put your name or and what department you're from, if just so you guys can get to know each other. All right. Part 1, science of self-compassion. I come to this, just so you know, as a chaplain in oncology for a long time at Fred Hutch. And so really the areas of, we had so much stress and burnout and moral distress and trauma, primary and secondary trauma. And that I was like, we have got to find a solution. There's only so many hot baths you can take and slow walks and lavender that you can smell before you need to find a solution. And self-compassion can be part of that transformation. And so that's why I'm excited to share that with you today. For whatever background of healthcare or not healthcare, navigating these last 3 years and et cetera has been a challenge. And so today we're going to talk about 3 common barriers to self-compassion, at least 7 research-based benefits and high associations with self-compassion and self-compassion training, and explore self-compassion practices. And first, we're going to start off really trying to recognize the relationship between empathy, empathic distress, and compassion. I'll just let you know, I talk fast. I put a lot of stuff in there. So if you need to rewind this tape at the, later to get it all in, go ahead. But I'm happy to also dig a little deeper as questions come up. Please know that most of this, we'll delve into a few practices as we have time, but just know that when I invite you into that growth space, if you feel like you're uncomfortable and overwhelmed, you don't have to do what you're being invited to do, all right? Or you can adjust it, go back to the growth. We have best growth when we kind of move a little out of our safe place, but not towards overwhelm. And so I invite you to monitor that for yourself today and enter activities as you see fit. Okay, opening exercise. Let's just take a moment as we try to define what compassion is, to really feel what that is. So I invite you right now, take a few minutes. Just take a couple deep breaths if you are able. Deep breath in and a little slow breath out. We won't have a lot of meditation, but I'm just trying to get us into that space. Maybe you've been in a hurried space. And I invite you to recall a moment of compassion that someone had for you. What did you feel? Maybe it's recent or in the distant past, whatever feels most vivid and accessible. When did you receive kindness or compassion from someone? What did you notice or hear, feel, or sense? Let that become as vivid for you as you can, as if you're living that lovely moment of compassion. Notice the places in your body that are expressing that feeling. And also if you're more, kind of where does it hit you in your own thoughts as well? So letting go of that memory, taking a little bit to notice, breathing in and out a little bit. I want you to bring to mind another time of compassion when you were the agent of compassion. Maybe when you reached out to somebody. Noticing, feeling, hearing what was done, and how did you know in both those places that it was compassion? And I would just invite you to kind of take a moment thinking about that time go back to that time when you received compassion, and how did you know it was compassion? And just take a moment and write that in your chat.
Keeping an eye out. I'll let you know if any come through.
Yeah, good.
It
Well,
made
I'll
me
let you
think of a sense of relief, and yeah, a sense of relief when you receive that compassion.
Yeah, that's a wonderful word, relief. I like that. Thank you.
It says, felt seen, heard, accepted as I am. Didn't feel the need to explain myself, felt cared for, valued.
Nice. Well, that's lovely.
Understood.
Thank you for those. Thank you for those observations. And just so you know, even when we put ourselves in that place to remember a time of compassion, it lights up all the lovely compassion feelings and also puts us often into that parasympathetic dominant nervous system, where we're able to activate our immune system, rest and digest, relaxes our body, puts us in that place. And so a lot of these things are kind of connected. But if you're not into meditation, even recalling a memory like that can really be therapeutic. So compassion, there's been a lot more research on compassion, and it's become a research element in the last 15 years or 20 years. And this is how it's being defined in the scientific journals. So compassion is an awareness of suffering coupled with the willingness to do something to relieve the suffering. So you feeling relieved, Anna, it's just right in the definition. I love that. And here is another way of looking at it that I'd like to demonstrate. So here's some key components of compassion. Now in the Pali, compassion and self-compassion are the same word. Unfortunately, in English, they're not. So I just invite you to kind of flow back and forth as we speak first I'm just going to think of compassion as the umbrella over both those things right now, because I don't speak Pali. So first we have that awareness. If we're giving compassion to ourselves or others, we have that awareness of suffering, which is cognitive, empathetic. And then we have that feeling of concern of the one who is suffering, which in self-compassion is ourselves. The desire to wish or relieve that suffering for someone else or ourselves. The belief we can make a difference. So these are all kind of the first parts. And then the willingness to respond and that sense of satisfaction at the end. That's kind of the full cycle of compassion. What I want to bring your attention to is these first 3 steps. In these first 3 steps, our bodies signal distress and pain, whether it's our pain, someone else's pain. Anytime that the first step of compassion to ourselves or others is to notice suffering. And that's in the pain center of our brain. It's where we have it's where we have that pain response. Now, if we often in healthcare, I'll just say, we see pain, we move on to the next pain, and we may not process it fully. But when we are able to process it, we move the what shows up in our brain moves from empathic distress to compassion satisfaction. So when we have that belief that we can make a difference, and with that willingness to make a difference, and then we have that sense of satisfaction, which restores us to the next time we see pain in ourselves or others. Now, unfortunately, we don't always get to that satisfaction point. And as you may know, think of the things that drop us off this full cycle. If we always start with some distress, right? But we might have shut ourselves down and just numbed ourselves, so that because there's so much going on in this world and so much pain that we've numbed ourselves not to be aware of suffering at all. That still shows up as pain. We might have that feeling concern for others, but not feel like right here that we can make a difference. We might have a sense of hopelessness or helplessness, and not feel like we can do anything with overwhelming things. And I don't really want to list them all here to traumatize us, but as you know, racism, climate change, like all the types of things, what's going on in our family, what's going on with ourselves. And again, I work with healthcare folks, and so a lot of suffering, obviously, we see each day. But when we feel like we can't make a difference, what we end up doing, as you can see, is we go from 4 and we go right back. We just stop, we shunt this, and we stay in that pain, empathic distress, and we just go round for another round of it, and it keeps us in a distressed state. So the helpfulness of practices, compassion meditation is one, or self-compassion practices, can help us through this moment where we think that we can't make a difference, but at least we can, by saying, we can stop ourselves there, and do some intervention. So as to move from the numbing, move from the sense of helplessness and hopelessness to a sense that we can do something, or a willingness to take action. That moves us through that cycle. As we care for others, it helps us with that resilience, and as we care for ourselves too. We'll talk more about that later, but as you think of your negative responses in your own self-talk, often we just keep doing that. We don't even think I'm suffering because we're so numb to it. And so we end up staying in that distress cycle. So I'll just leave you with that there. If there may be some more questions on that, and feel free if you have more questions on that. All right. So these are the things that can help us fall off of that, help us avoid the full piece of getting to that compassion satisfaction. And these are just trauma indicators. There's many, we could minimize, we can, like I said, feel helpless and hopeless. There's just all sorts of ways. Guilt or fear can really help us concentrate on ourselves rather than on the other person, or on giving ourselves compassion as a compassionate receptor. So think of all of those selves that can kind of move our attention from that cycle, and keep us in that pain response. So when a living system, which is either a group of people or a person, is suffering from ill health, the remedy is found by connecting with more of itself. Compassion is about connection. Self-compassion is not about avoiding our pain, but noticing it, meeting it, and connecting to it. So that's our ultimate goal in most of this, is we keep that in mind as the first step in compassion is to be aware that we're suffering. The second step is to have the willingness to actually relieve it. The third step is to develop our skills and practice to reset our default. So let me say a bit more about self-compassion. Kristen Neff has done most of the early work on self-compassion by just being able to define it in a way. And she found these 3 elements of self-compassion: mindfulness. So are we more, and she developed a self-compassion scale. So mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness are the 3 elements of self-compassion. You can see they're opposites. Are you more mindful, or do you, when things happen, saying, oh, I sound angry. Are you able to kind of be that third eye, that third person and say, oh, I feel angry. Oh, I noticed that I did this thing that wasn't so great. Or I noticed that I'm joyful. Do you have a sense that you can notice what is going around, or do you over identify and just be like, I'm angry, and just absolutely overwhelmed by that emotion or that state? Common humanity versus isolation. When you make mistakes, do you feel like you're the only one in the world who's made them? Do you feel separated from others? Or do you have ever have a sense of feeling, oh, other people have been here before me? A sense that I'm not alone in this. And self-kindness. Are we able to stop kind of our self-judging thoughts with some sense of self-kindness? She goes on to give us a really quick meditation or a quick way to get through self-compassion practice on the go, and says mindfulness, an example of that is to say, oh, if you think of something right now that's really difficult, the first step is to say, I hurt. This is suffering. I'm suffering. And then to be able to say, oh, I'm not alone in it. Or I know I've been here before. Other people have been here before. This is a part of common humanity. And then I care. I'll be okay. So I hurt. I'm alone. I'll be okay. I'm not alone. Sorry. I'll be okay. That is kind of her easy way of walking through this. And I think that practice can be one of the best ones, actually, to help us understand these components. Let's see, where are we at with time? 12:18. Okay. I think why don't we just we do have time to take a minute. I'd just like you to take a minute and recall a feeling, a time that you felt, maybe you did something that you felt bad about, or maybe you were suffering in some way. Maybe you have it could be as easy as like, I interrupted a person, or I, said something unskillful to somebody recently. Just think of one of those type of incidences. And you don't have to think of a 10, think of an 8 or a 5. I invite you to recall feelings that surfaced. Maybe it's physical and emotional. Maybe you felt your hands getting sweaty, or your face getting red, or you felt frustrated. Just take a few moments to note what those are. And if you have a pen and paper, write it down, but just take a few moments to write, what did that suffering look like? And now I invite you to take a moment to let's try to experience common humanity. Maybe acknowledging that others have had this, maybe others have been in the same situation we're in, maybe not. If not, maybe they've felt the same feelings we've had that we noticed in the mindfulness section. Invite you write that statement out or say it to yourself. I'm not alone. I've been here before. Others have experienced this. For some, this can be one of the hardest steps. And then finally, self-kindness. I invite you to, if you have the words, great, you can talk to yourself and say you're cared for, you'll be okay. Or if that's hard, which that can be very difficult because we're not practiced at this. We're very good at being self-judgy, but not at being self-kind. So sometimes we need a few words. Imagine what you would say to a friend in your position. And just write one sentence with that. Thank you for trying that. I don't know where this is in your circle of safety or growth, but we won't have another practice until maybe the end of this. I'm going to be talking about the science next. But I'm curious, as you reflect on this, was there one area, what was that like for you? And is there one area that was harder, that was the most difficult for you? Or the easiest? Like, just say, what was most difficult? If you can write in the chat, go ahead and share that with one another, because we need a little common humanity right now. Okay, well, anybody chooses to do that, great. If not, I'm gonna say, well, why is self-compassion if it's so great? Oh, self-kindness is a hard step. Yes, I'm seeing that in common humanity. Oh, I really appreciate your words of hardest to acknowledge is that I'm feeling hurt. I think you're onto something. I think often we breeze right through that. I come from a very stoic group of people, and wow, it has taken some training as a chaplain to understand when I'm being hurt too. So, and not just gather those for others, because sometimes you can be very compassionate to others and just not have a big highway to understanding our own self-compassion needs. So, oh, yes, happy calming. Great. Getting some really good responses in the chat. Thank you. I like the idea of thinking of moments of compassion. It's that it's happy and calming. And I appreciate you saying that. Sometimes saying these phrases seems disingenuous. Yes, that I'm not trying to force those on you. We have to kind of find our own, but it is a practice. It's not professional. So I really appreciate it. So let's talk more about why it is so difficult. This is a perfect segue. If self-compassion is so great, why is it so difficult? So here we are. Paul Gilbert has done some wonderful work in the UK on fears of compassion scale, and he has a number of them. We'll talk more in this next section about fears of compassion to others, from others, but here's the fears of our own self-compassion. Think of what comes up for you. And I invite you, if you find one of these, let's just take a moment to read these. I don't deserve, and which ones resonate for you? I don't deserve to be kind and forgiving. I worry that if I'm less self-critical, my standards will drop. I'll become dependent on it. My flaws will show. I don't even know where I'd begin with feeling compassion to myself. I'll be seen as weak, or others will reject me. Or even some people say take advantage of me, honestly. So some of the common fears are just being self-indulgent or having too much self-pity, or that our standards will drop. And I will say, just for the science, yes. For the science, I'm just going to say, speak to the standards will drop one, especially because so many of these are societal pressures. And they studied young adults. And I have a footnote for this if you need it, but there was a wonderful study on young adult women who were athletes, and they did a self-compassion intervention with them for a number of weeks, and wanted to find out if their abilities went down, their competitiveness went down or up, and they found that it did not decrease, but did help them. I mean, you can imagine if it's one less worry that you're kind of carrying, actually, if you're compassionate to yourself, but that wasn't obvious to anyone. So they found that it did actually help and improve their performance. When they did qualitative questions afterwards and said, would you continue with this, or do you think it helped you? All of them said absolutely no, because they thought that it would make their standards drop. So even if after the science, when people were interviewed, they really didn't, there's such external pressure, and not even pressure, but just it's in the water for us to have that critical analysis. Also, many of us are academics, are in academia, and so of course there is, of course we have a critical analysis bent. Not that that's wrong, it's just that being able to hold those together can even be harder sometimes. I don't deserve to be kind and forgiving, the quintessential I'm fine. Yes, yes, I'm fine. We kind of numb ourselves or minimize. Great. So I appreciate you kind of talking about interacting with that. Our task is not to, Rumi says, to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within ourselves that we have built against it. So can we do that? Well, indeed, yes, we can. We can train for compassion and for self-compassion. All right, great. That puts us at just right on time to talk. We're going to spend a section here talking really about the current science in self-compassion. And I'm just going to give you tastes of it, mostly drawn from some healthcare needs, but I feel like self-compassion really has been highly associated with a decrease in burnout and exhaustion. We can't find causal things, but we can find mostly high associations. Decrease of burnout and exhaustion, decrease of anxiousness and depression, an increase of purpose and social connection. So it's a really pro-social behavior. So we might think it's self-indulgent to be self-compassionate, but it actually helps us connect to others too. And be feel less isolated. Can soothe our inner critic. As you know, we all have a negative bias of looking for danger, and it can help soothe that. Tone our vagal nerve. That's a whole nother lecture, but an indication of parasympathetic nervous system dominance. Help us be more accepting and pro-social. And finally, this was Stanford does a study every year with has done study routinely with doctors, and the lack of self-compassion has been seen as the strongest personal resilience domain predictor of burnout. Now, in the domain of all the things that can cause burnout, 80% is a lot of external stuff, and about 20% is what we have control over. And within that 20%, lack of self-compassion has been the strongest predictor of burnout. Strongest personal resilience domain predictor. So it mitigates burnout. Lack of self-compassion is a high predictor of burnout. So it has been seen as, and that's not surprising when we look at other studies that include compassion meditation or self-compassion. And these are and often they include loving kindness meditation or mindfulness, self-compassion. And they have been done with, here's one, loving kindness meditation, which, as you may be familiar with, is may you be peaceful, may be free from fear and suffering, may you live with peace and joy. It's phrases like that, may you be peaceful, safe, live with ease, etc. And often it's directed to others, to ourselves, to maybe somebody who it's difficult relationship with, to the whole world. So it's directed many different directions under this, but it's a loving kindness meditation. It comes from from Buddhist roots, but has been well studied. And they found that it improved healthcare provider compassion, resilience, and patient care. It increased those feelings of social connection and increased the ratings of closeness to strangers. So that was a first study. What really got me on this was, as I was looking for literature on secondary traumatic stress, there was actually, and its connection with self-compassion as a mitigator, I found these two studies. One is a pilot, but with combat veterans, there were actually, this is two different studies. Self-compassion predicted a lower post-traumatic stress symptom severity. So and with self-compassion also activated lowered symptom severity, controlling for combat experience. The first one, they just measured self-compassion and measured the symptom severity. And in the second thing, this which happened at the VA here in Seattle, they did a 12-week compassion meditation course that was about 2 hours each time. And anybody who had attended 9 of those or more was kept in the results. So that is significant. Nurses, they did a study and found that they did a mindfulness compassion study course with these folks that was 8 weeks long, 2 hours a week, and it increased acceptance, positive mental state, enhance coping, and reduce self-criticism. So I'm just going to quickly, let's see, do we have time? Yes. I'm going to show you some of the results. These aren't published, but this is some stuff that I've been doing. I do a compassion cultivation training course, which this is not an ad for at all. It's just one of those courses that's 8 weeks long, 2 hours a week. And I've done it a couple times with staff at UW Medical Center. And we've had about 20 people each time. And here's some of the results that we had. We pre-tested them baseline for secondary trauma, traumatic stress, and burnout, and also something else, self-compassion. And here, as you can see, in the 16 pairs in the upper right there, we have a pre-post for 6. This is paired data, and so it's the same person. Lowered people had associations of lowered intrusion, avoidance, and arousal. So those are 3 pieces of secondary traumatic stress, and which is very related to post-traumatic stress. You'll notice in the box below that ahead of time we had quite a few in the moderate, high, and severe stress. We had 15, and that lowered to 5 by the end. And so and we got a lot more minimal secondary traumatic stress after this 8-week program. So we also had in this red box, you'll see that we lowered the burnout, we increased the self-compassion, and lowered the secondary traumatic stress. So we didn't, not causally, but had high associations with that. And you can kind of see above in that orange that we had about 9 people, actually we had 12 people in the burnout ahead that said, yes, I'm burned out to a certain degree. And by the end, we had only 3. So we were able to make a pretty big mark. And the self-compassion change, the secondary traumatic stress change, was actually pretty dramatic. I mean, it went down like 13 points, which is quite a bit out of a scale of about, the baseline had been 45. So we had pretty good results with that. All right, enough of that. I don't want to carry on too long, but so how can we do it? Can we reset the default response? Well, actually, I'm just going to pause there for questions since we're at the half hour. Any questions or comments to some of that? Okay, go ahead and put them in the chat if you need to, but I just wanted to give you a little pause because I know I talk a little fast. All right, so can we reset our default? That is the big question. Can we make a state a trait, or a trait a state? Can we move from just experiencing it once to this being more of a default response? And the answer is yes, you can. They have done some, Tanya Singer with the Max Planck Institute has done a lot of studies about empathic distress and compassion responses. And she noticed like a couple things that they've noticed when they've done, they often will do like an fMRI, maybe show people pictures or have them think about certain things with clearly, pre and post any kind of intervention. And what they found is that people will move through that empathic distress response faster when they've studied meditators, big Tibetan meditators that do loving kindness meditation all the time, compassion meditation all the time. Those people started, of course, with that empathic distress response of seeing the pain, but then moving right into that sense of compassion, either for another, but you can also do that for yourself. It's the same cycle. So yes, we can is my answer to that. And that really again has been a wonderful finding in the scientific literature. So practically, let's move on to that. How can we have some self-compassion and pausing practices? Well, first, the first step was just to say we're suffering. So some of it is finding out what our prompts are. Maybe we're so used to cruising by that voice in our head that's been negative that we go so fast by it, we minimize it, that we don't even have time to offer ourselves self-compassion. So being able to slow down and notice that either we're not feeling calm, that we feel hurt, or we're feeling disconnected, finding some ways to also think about suffering or hurt, and to notice when it happens. Setting an intention. Maybe it is trying that really quick loving kindness meditation. Or I find, I work with patients, and so, but you can do this with anyone. Having a sense of equilibrium. You're with someone, like, let's say I'm talking with Anna, and all of a sudden I am just overwhelmed by sadness, or what she has reminded me, talking about has reminded me of some of my own pain. And I'm like, all of a sudden my attention to caring for her as a chaplain has come upon myself. That's what happens when we're in pain. We sometimes like this, and I notice that I'm not listening anymore. I'm thinking of that, and I think, oh, okay. And instead of getting mad at myself about that, or trying to go back to only focus on her, try the equilibrium. One breath for you, one breath for me. So I'm listening to Anna, and I'm going, one breath for me, one breath for you. And it's a way to care for ourselves and the other at the same time, and really introduce an intention of equilibrium in the moment. We can try the self-compassion on the go that Kristen Neff talked about, being able to find that where we say, oh, I am hurting, I am in pain. Or if that's hard to say, just to say, oh, this is hard. I'm frustrated. Wait, when I say I'm frustrated, that means I'm probably having a pain response. Okay, find out what your prompt is, but to be able to say, this is hard, I'm hurt. And then to go, oh, I'm not alone, and I'll be okay. Finally, I have another one that I learned from this wonderful Sufi master in town, who said, find a nickname for yourself, and it can just be dear one. But if you have a nickname that someone beloved has called you, go ahead and call yourself that. And he would put his hand on his heart and he would say, oh, dear one. Oh, when something would happen, let's say he's just getting all frustrated, road rage, whatever it is, but he would just say, there you go again. And he would talk to himself in that third person. That is a really therapeutic way that a lot of therapies, we talk to our younger self, we talk to ourselves in third person to be our own best friend. So going through those self-compassion on the go phrases, but saying, oh, I see you're suffering. I see you're in pain. You're not alone. You'll be okay. Let me help you through this. We can do this. By doing that, we are able to companion ourselves and offer ourselves that capacity of companionship. And it might be easier that way than honestly going from the I center, because that might be just too harsh of a change. So that's a lovely, gentle way to do that as well. Other ways is imagining a moment of compassion, or imagining someone we know who we know loves us. It could be a pet, but who we feel compassion for, and then imagining them having compassion for us, and sharing it with us. So those are all things that we can do on the go that we don't have to sit for 20 minutes or 40 minutes for. However, of course, those sitting practices can be really helpful, but that's not a requirement for just having compassion. So a moment of self-compassion can change our entire day, but a string can really change the course of our lives. Chris Germer works a lot with Kristen Neff. He's a psychologist, and you'll see a lot of books published from him as well, who has really been one at the forefront of self-compassion. So before we do our final summary and practice, I'd like to at least summarize these steps. Compassion can really transform our lives. It can transform ourselves when we're able to move from that minimization or numbing, or able to notice that we are human beings that suffer as well. And we feel like we can help ourselves through that. We'll have that sense when we feel like we can be agents to say, I'm hurt, and offer ourselves compassion. We can go through this whole cycle instead of just being in that first empathic distress cycle of I'm hurt, I'm hurt, I'm hurt. This holds true for compassion for others as well, which we'll talk more about in the next session. But when we get to that compassion satisfaction stage, it really is the reward center. It's a caregiver response, and it even is a response about boundaries too. So summary, the cycle of compassion can help us move from that empathic distress response to compassion satisfaction. We've talked about the research, mitigating burnout and secondary traumatic stress, lowering the severity of symptoms of trauma, increasing our vagal tone, among other things, mitigating burnout. And self-compassion can be learned. We can reset our self-compassion response through practice and skills. And there's numerous places that we can do that. There's some trainings out there. I'm giving you the national forms of that compassion cultivation training, which started at Stanford. And they have an institute with the School of Medicine where they came up with that. It's, again, the main one is, many of these are 8 weeks, 2 hours a week, but they also have shortened versions of them as well. Mindful self-compassion is Kristen Neff's work, which is also very, very focuses specifically on self-compassion and also fierce self-compassion, right? She's talking a lot about, it's not really about you being weak, it's also about being strong. There's fierce compassion. And then the Center for Child and Family Wellbeing, CCFW, right here in our neighborhood in University of Washington, offers MSc and CCT courses all the time and variations of it. So I recommend them. And just if you're going through and want to know practices and the science and a lot of videos, Greater Good Science Center can be a wonderful thing. So we have a final practice. I'm just going to pause there just to see if there's anything else in the chat. Is there anything, Anna, to attend to?
Yeah, I received a question directly. It's asking, and I know you're going to speak to this in session 2, but maybe we can just have a little precursor. How can you engage self-compassion if compassion is lacking for others?
If my compassion for others?
Yeah. If maybe you're having a little compassion fatigue and lacking in the compassion you can give to others, does that impact your ability to show compassion to yourself, and how are they connected?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Yeah. Okay. So, I think, often our compassion fatigue, as it used to be called, which is now kind of burnout and secondary traumatic stress, they really are in 2 different buckets. And often it is true that if we fill our own bucket, it helps us offer compassion to others. But we can live a long time giving compassion to others without any to ourselves. So it isn't. So how do you find it for yourself if you can't find it for others? I would also, I guess practice, but I'd also maybe figure out like what our barriers are to receiving compassion. Looking at that as well. So we are able to do that. We are able to do that if it just feels too hard to have compassion for others. And sometimes when there's distress in a relationship, it really is helpful to start with the pain that you feel in that. And that might open up a space. I will say in the loving kindness practice, they often when I've done that with groups, I might say, think of yourself with a friend who loves you and offer them compassion. So that's the easy ability to have compassion. And then think of them offering it to you, because sometimes we can't even imagine offering it to ourselves, right? And just doing those 2 things can build up our sense of compassion. And then we might have the strength to imagine and just try to offer compassion to another who we don't know as well. And then maybe the next step, and this is just there's thousands of years of practice on this, but to someone who could just be a passerby and someone who we have a difficult relationship with. So that's kind of how in mindful self-compassion and in CCT, how we kind of go through the steps of building those resources. Does that explain that, Anna, a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Yeah.
It's a big question.
And then,
yeah,
there was another question. You mentioned the Sufi master. Can you add more who that is, or is that public teaching?
He's, well, I told him Jamal Rahman, who is at the Universalist Church in Ballard. And he has been one of the interspiritual 3 who have So his background is Islamic, which is the mystical part of Islam is Sufi. So he's the one who shared that with me, and he does teach classes regularly. So his last name is Rahman, and Jamal, Jamal, and we might be able to find him on the web, honestly, and give a link. So
Great. Yeah, there's a few people sharing in the chat. They're familiar as well. So for
thank you.
whomever asked a question, I'm sure they could reach out for more info.
Good.
Those are the only questions for now. The only other thing I'll add before the exercise is someone also shared with me that, as I'm sure you're familiar, Dr. Elizabeth Lynn, a UW physician, has a few recorded self-compassion webinars, I think fairly similar to this as well. So that's another resource.
Yes, and her training she's done the MBSR, mindful based stress reduction, and she's done mindful self-compassion training. Yeah. And those are all kind of brothers and sisters of compassion cultivation training. They all tend to be about 8 weeks long, but we do smaller things. So she's a wonderful resource for that. Good. Great. Okay. I'm going to just go through this little practice, and this might be something you go back to because it takes a while to kind of dig in, but we know that we have a negative bias, right? We're wired to be scared of tigers and things that threaten us. And for my healthcare friends and anybody who is in any caregiving relationship, we're always looking for danger so that we can help out. Like, we don't want falls, we want, and everything. And so we are really wired for that. And that is just human nature, right? The negative screams at us, the positive whispers, is a whisper. And so we often are looking at, also in the judgmental sense, we might look at the bad things that we do and focus on them more than the 10 great things that are going on in our life. So knowing that, it's not unusual for us to have some pretty nasty self-talk. So for there's a lot of us who have that. And if this isn't your thing, share it with a friend who it might be their thing. So influencing our own dialogue, how do we befriend ourselves? So I'd like you to think about who your inner critic is. So let's just take a breath. That kind of helps us look a little bit more widely. But what does your inner critic sound like? Is it somebody's voice, or is it, see if you can kind of get a sense of when that is. But reflect. Take a little moment to reflect on your inner critic. And when does it show up? What kinds of things does it say to you? You're welcome to put those in the chat if you want to, but I will just repeat a few things that are common. You're not enough. How could you do that? Saying all these horrible things, but this is what we do. Anna, do you have some ideas of what do our inner critics say to each other? That's not good enough. Try that again. That's not going to work.
Why can't you be better?
Why did you do that? Just questioning, right? It's pesky. I invite you again. So think of what it's saying to you. And then what I invite you to do is we're going to go through, and now this is Tara Brach's. I'm just putting this into Tara Brach's work, which is these 4 steps that she uses for everything. But it's easy to remember because it's RAIN techniques. So recognize, when do I hear this inner critic? When I hear it, often I will just say in the next week, think of when, if you can recognize your inner critic coming up, that is success, because sometimes we've been living with it with so many decades that we don't hear it. But so we recognize it, and then acknowledge it. So right now, whatever that phrase that it's saying to you, think about it saying it to you. Think of what your inner critic says, and then address it. Hello, Shirley, or Bob, or hello, pesky little one. Give it a name. And changing from, resistance to kind of being neutral and having compassion for it. Hello, how are you? So we have kind of neutralized it a little bit. and then investigate. Ask it what its purpose is and think about why, what is it trying to do? At the UW, we talk about assume best intent. What is the best intent of this critical voice? Now, it could be that it's trying to protect you, or that in another time it was trying to protect you. Don't cross the street. That's dangerous. Wait, it could be that. Or I don't know how, that's a stupid idea, but maybe it doesn't want you to look, it's afraid that you're going to look stupid. It's a very anxious little guy sometimes, or mean, but mostly anxious. So it could be trying to help you in some way, and finding out what that purpose is or was a long time ago. It's good to investigate. And now I invite you to take a moment and say, thank you for trying to protect me, or for trying to alert me of danger, but no, not right now. I'm grown. Thank you very much, but I don't need you right now. Go play over there. Just being able to engage it instead of just resisting it can take the power out of it. And then you have a moment to say, and I invite you to do that now, just say, like if let's see, what did you say, Anna? Or like if it's judging you, this isn't a good idea. Maybe it's self-assurance or something, to be able to say, you have good ideas. Give it a try. It may fail, it may not, but be able to speak to yourself as a friend right now to address that. And I invite you, this technique of addressing, and even if in this first week you can see and notice when you're being self-critical and just say hello to it. That's a big step, but moving past and administering some compassion towards it, which is towards yourself, might help us let go. So I invite you to that. Great.
For that. Yeah, I'm looking through.
Yeah, well, I don't have any, that is my final part. And so I'm just open to any questions right now, or any other comments that folks have. It has really been delightful to be with you this hour. Thank you.
It's just always such a great reminder, and helpful to dig deep and not only see the science and the proven efficacy, but also learn a little bit about how to practice. While I wait to see if some questions come in, a few comments earlier were kind of talking about, and I was hoping you could speak to this, the difference between, belittling or invalidating the pain you get and practicing self-compassion, because they are, it's different. Self-compassion isn't forcing you to say that it's okay, the pain, but it can help you through it. Yeah. So can we talk about that difference?
Yeah. So in one sense, you're saying kind of minimizing the pain, but you're also, I think you were saying something else. Like if you were the one who caused the pain.
Or if you're receiving pain and you want to show compassion for yourself, or you're experiencing pain, the practice of self-compassion is very beneficial in that sense. But it's the practice of self-compassion is not saying that your pain is invalid.
No. In fact,
yeah. So can we just speak to
yes.
that?
I think it's actually the exact opposite of that. It's sort of by, we can try to avoid and push away stuff, but it actually gives stuff more power. But when we are a little bit vulnerable and say, I am in pain, this is painful, then we're able to administer some compassion towards ourselves. It may not stop external pain, but it gives us a softer landing. I find, in fact, that's why people, does that answer a little bit of it? Get to it. And if not, please put something in the chat. I'd love to hear, or if that was your question, go ahead and we have a couple, 2 minutes, maybe. Yeah, go ahead and raise your hand or whatever, if that was your question.
I can read, there's a few more. Yeah, it was kind of, it was just a discussion earlier on when we were looking at kind of the response and moving through the steps. So I think you spoke to it perfectly.
Noticing one is helpful, and it really is about that mindfulness of noting where our resistance to some of that can be, and still being authentic with ourselves. So go ahead, Anna.
Great. Yeah. Another question is, what's the difference of you'll be okay and you deserve better?
I mean, both of those are kind of soothing. So I guess it would depend on the context. But I'm going to take this to a different place maybe, but being with suffering is walking with someone in that suffering. Being with ourselves in suffering is walking with ourselves in that suffering to alleviate it. It may be what you'd say to a friend is you deserve better, and maybe that is what we need to say to ourselves. Who knows? But the action is the connection, right? And so I'm going to people have talked about what like self-esteem and those kind of things don't really give you connection. They may help, but they have the offsides of narcissism and a couple other things. And they really are about external judgment, you know, which you deserve better might be a little bit of that, but it might, I don't want to judge you on that at all. I'm taking this to like the extremes. If you're looking for a difference. But I would think that, and so self-compassion really, that is really about connecting to ourselves and connecting to each other. And if that is what you would say to a friend, sometimes we say that to a friend, you deserve better. So there may or may not be, you know, I mean, it may be in that kind of talk, but you'll be okay is more of the state of like walking through it, not about all the external circumstances that will come and go, because you may suffer either way. If you and you will suffer again. So I don't know if that answers
Oh,
that.
thank you. Yeah, I think that's great.
Really good.
I'm getting a few other messages here. One I think is really great is how can we help our teams, coworkers engage with these concepts or bring them into the workplace potentially in an environment where people might not be as comfortable talking about feelings in work or approaching these concepts and obviously respectfully bringing it to the table, but also trying to share the benefits. Do you have recommendations on incorporating self-compassion in our work, in other
Oh
words?
man, one, that is my life's work. So call me, let's do this. Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, you can't force anything on anyone. That's just that, but inviting people into it or and practicing it ourselves is usually the best first step. But as you know, most of those phrases that we have for ourselves can go for others, you know, and so sometimes that's how people hear compassion. They can't even get compassion to themselves because they don't even know what it's like to receive it, you know. So I think those phrases of acknowledging pain in our work or suffering, or I hear you frustrated, and not saying you're not alone, we all are, to diminish it, but to say, yeah, I've been there before. We've been, you know, a lot of us are feeling that right now. You know, being able to somehow offer compassion might soften them up to the idea of it. I'm going to think on that as far as like, I mean, I would call, please feel free to email me to see what your context is, because I love that challenge. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. I think, you know, modeling compassion and self-compassion the best you can into meeting practices and the way you maybe have one-on-ones or the way you facilitate work deadlines. And I think there's a lot of ways you can kind of bake acceptance into our work processes. And I don't mind, I can give a lot of advice in that area.
I probably have too many ideas, but I will say that in healthcare, if I link it, I mean, linking it to this mitigates burnout. You know, you have burnout. This mitigates trauma and secondary trauma and the symptoms of it. We know we have that. After COVID, we all in the world know we have that. This, you know, like knowing the science, I mean, that's the knowledge part of some opening. And I once did a meditation piece for a lung doctor who I love, and his group. And all we did was the love and kindness meditation. I said, the benefits are, you know, I did those parasympathetic and sympathetic, you know, that your pulse will lower, all these things will help physically, you know, let's try it. They got out of their safety. They tried it. And at the end, he was like, it worked. It worked on my pulse. And I was like, that's great. Now, next time,
watch.
if you know that, maybe you'll do more. And he did. He became a champion of this type of well-being.
That's awesome. So I'm going to ask one last question. The person who asked is still here, and we've got about 50 with us, and then we'll probably call it for time. But
Okay, well, thank you all for having here. Yeah.
Yeah, the question is, how do we reconcile accountability for what we might have done better, what we could have done better? So kind of still having some sense of accountability without, like, how do we reconcile that with self-blame and the negative talk? You want to show yourself compassion, but maybe you also want to recognize opportunities for growth. How do we reconcile the two?
Well, I think one, it's kind of in your sentence. It's not really an either or, it's a both and. So we are very committed to one side of this, the self-critical. I mean, honestly, I will not name members in my family right now, but this is what I do with my life. And it's still not an easy concept for people I know really well, because they have really spent their lives going, I see what I can do better and I do better, and I see what I can do better and I do better, and that works. And on the side of that, we can be accountable. We can say that works. We can see what we could do better. We can say, you know what, other people have been in this situation where they messed up and could do better. I'm one of those, man, yeah, I'll probably be here again. I'm here now. I'm going to try to do better. I really am. I'm going to commit to that. But I also love myself in the midst of this, right? And so being able to, and it kind of hurt that I wasn't doing better, to acknowledge that suffering, that common humanity, that sense of self-kindness in the midst of it. I think holding those two the same. That's
great.
hard. Yeah.
Kind of like you were talking about the study with the athletes, and how often, I know I've heard Christina speak to this, the idea that if you practice self-compassion, many people think they'll lose kind of their drive or their interest in growth, but it's actually, studies have shown the opposite. It helps you to be more inspired to grow in the ways that you feel inspired from a accepting and loving space, not from a critical growth space. So I think that's a really great question.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive in some of our cultures. So that's all right. That's why we take the science and ask people to take the leap and try it out. It won't do you harm.
Well, there's just so much kudos for you in the chat, and thank you for all your time and expertise, setting up this presentation and being with us in community. Definitely look forward to this 22nd. I think we'll just get so much more out of it as well.
Yeah, we'll talk about why it's hard to love others, where our bias kind of comes from, and some practices that we can do to kind of help alleviate that when we know that we have hard time being compassionate to others. So it has been delightful to be with you. Thank you, Anna, so much for setting up, and thank you so many of you for being here today.